you're an executive, there's a good chance you're going to be going through an executive assessment by your board or other team members, maybe even your executive coach. Well, what does that experience feel like? What do you expect from it? And what should you do with the assessment? To get those answers, we're here today with Dr. Jeff Kaplan. He's going to answer those for me. Welcome, Jeff. Welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Raj. It's always great to be here.
This is a very important topic because most executives will at some point go through a 360 assessment, a DISC assessment. There's all kinds of assessments. So let's talk about that experience. What can you tell me more about this whole process and what executives should expect?
Yeah. So when you think about executive assessment, usually we're talking about, various assessments on personality, behavior, communication, decision style, and as you mentioned, like 360 feedback. And so I'm thinking of different doorways of like, oh, we need an assessment, right? So the most common one that our team does a lot of is this leader is going to be in a leadership development program, right? So we're looking to improve their ability to lead, right, to do their job. So we want to do some assessments on the front end, and we're doing it for two reasons. One type of assessment is like to find out who we are, right? Who is this person, right? And then the second one would be like the 360, and how is who they are showing up at work, right? In the eyes of other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
But another doorway is you mentioned a board, right? So a lot of times if you're selecting somebody to, whether it's a C-suite spot or, any other position, you may end up with like, say, 3 final candidates based on all the other data that you're looking at. And now you're trying to really fine tune and discern who do we think would be the best fit for this role. An example I can give you is when I hire an administrative assistant, I want someone who's very high detail oriented. People have often accused me of being very detail oriented, and that's probably true, but but painfully so, right? I want someone whose natural style is like they love details. An assessment
Mm-hmm.
can help identify that if they're just naturally highly detail oriented and or not. That's just an example. And then there's other doorways that people might have an assessment.
I know that, we're all human. Executives are human too, and you might feel a little bit nervous going into an assessment. So what is that experience like for an executive?
It runs the gamut. I would say most people I would categorize as excited and nervous, right? So particularly if they've never gone through the experience before, it's interesting and exciting to learn more about yourself, but it's scary because you're doing it in the eyes of somebody else, right? So, it's like the concern is, am I being judged? Right? Like, what if I don't like what I see? Like, you're telling me this is how I am, but what if I don't like that? What I would say is, like, particularly if you're an adult, you've been around for a while, assessments in some ways maybe don't necessarily tell you something you didn't secretly already know about yourself, but now they make it hard to ignore, right? It's now sort of in quote black and white. And if you're working with like an executive coach or someone else who's helping you, like, use that assessment data to help you be more effective, it's very interesting and very, powerful, because it's like, well, now we both know where your natural strengths are, where your natural limitations are, where you might get in your own way. And now let's come up with some strategies that you can employ to help you be more successful.
And so what are some of the fears that people have going into it?
One, that to be judged, right? One is that the assessment data is going to get in the wrong hands, right? Like, are you giving this to my boss? Are you giving this to HR? If it's for selection, like, the interview, the candidate doesn't really own the data, right? Now, generally speaking, if I'm doing for selection, they're not getting the actual, the person who hired us isn't getting the reports. They're getting our summary of it. But that's one fear. The who's going to get it. But again, also, like, let me put it to you this way, Raj. Imagine if have been accused of maybe micromanaging and getting way too far in the weeds, right? And you can kind of like discount it. Well, this person needs to be, closely supervised because they're pretty incompetent. But then you get an assessment that says, no, this is how you are. You're a perfectionist, right? Who's gonna probably their default is to micromanage. And now you're told like, so this is it. So like you can't lie to me anymore, right? So let's just figure out how to recognize that that is a default of you, and then maybe try to compensate for that in some way.
So what do you do with the assessment when it's done? Or is there something else someone should know about going into the assessment before we move on to that?
Right. So first they're filling it out, right? And usually in all these assessments, it's like don't overthink it. Just give it 5 seconds per question, right? They usually have some issue with, well, it felt, they just use some issue with the way the questions were asked or whatever. But then we say, don't worry about it. Like it all comes out in the wash. So then we go through it and help them understand their data. What annoys me as a psychologist is when people who have never done a particular assessment before are given the report before they're given the chance to review the report with an expert in that assessment, right? It's like, imagine if I have all this data about you and then I just hand it to you and then like you don't know how to make sense of it. So you can way uh, overshoot your analysis of it, and it could be a really bad experience.
I think we all react to just words differently than like technical information. So, for example, if you saw an X-ray and you just handed the X-ray to somebody and said, "Well, here's your X-ray," and they were trying to analyze it on their own, they might be a little bit more fearful of that, thinking they might miss something. But with words, they kind of feel differently. Like, well, these are words. I should be able to digest that and understand that. Wait a minute, this isn't how I feel. This isn't what I said, and then they become defensive. So I get your point. You need to be there to help guide them through what all of the analysis actually means. Am I hearing
Yeah,
that
or they
correctly?
plug it into AI and say,
Oh,
what
it's
should I be
even
worried
worse, right?
about? And it's like, whoa, 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 slow down,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
Right.
That's a big fear. Yeah, I didn't think of that angle, but so many people are just uploading a document, and which, by the way, is not very safe to do because if you're uploading your own stuff, you don't know if the model that you used is actually taking that and using it to train something else. Some models don't, but some
It
models do.
probably,
So you got to
yeah,
be really careful with that too.
correct. And it probably is using it.
Yeah.
Exactly. So, to answer your question, right? So you help them contextualize it, you help them understand the data. And as I always say, like what we're looking for is just a better understanding of how you naturally are. There's no right way to be, there's no wrong way, there's no good, there's no bad. It's just who you are. Right. And and it should be really no surprises. But we're taking that and then we're going to use that to help put together like a leadership development plan, for example, or the whole goal is to be more effective at whatever you're doing and whoever you are, whether it's more effective in your relationships, work relationships, personal relationships, be more effective in your productivity, right? So if an assessment comes back and says you're highly distractible, right? And then I always get like, yes, I am. I can see you procrastinate. I can see that you have all these other things that say, wow, like, no wonder it took you forever to actually take the assessment when it was due 2 weeks ago, right? And so it's like, okay, now I know, and you know that I know. So let's put
Yeah.
together some strategies to help you focus, right? And to recognize when you're doing this thing that's showing up in this assessment. And so that's why we do assessments. But assessments are only as good as what you do with them. And so it's just really, important for, for to have an educated, certified person who's very experienced in these assessments do the review.
I think that's such a critical point because, for example, if you just give using the X-ray example to somebody who's still a med student or maybe just a very fresh, doctor, they may not have the level of experience to find those nuances that really make an impact, make a difference. And I think that seasoned certification, first of all, and a seasoned person is a much better bet. Tell me what happens next. Where do these assessments go? What's a typical process for that?
So, okay. So, usually it's an online survey, right? So they get a link, they take the survey, I get the report, or my team gets the report. We analyze the data. One of the things that we do specifically that most people don't is usually the assessment will have a computer generated report, but we'll take it and we'll actually go through it and then write a separate report of our own analysis, right? So here's how to interpret the report, right? And then here's our analysis of the report. And then here, we like to kind of get them started. Here are some very specific behavioral suggestions, right, to help you be more effective or whatever the context is based on the report. Okay, so then we go through it together. We try to make sense of it together. They ask questions. After the review process, I'll then say, okay, now this is a lot to digest. So, sit down with a glass of tea, or if you need to, a glass of wine or whatever it is, and go through it again yourself. Take note, any questions, any concerns. If you need, you can, reach out to me and we can talk through it. And then, but next time we speak, let's go through that. And then let's take that information and then let's put it into a plan, right? Let's come up with some very specific things that you can do differently, again, to be more effective or to improve your relationships, right? So they're taking it for some reason, right? Is it because I'm growing and developing as a leader? Okay, great. Is it because I'm having an issue in a relationship? Okay, so let's look at that. Is it, am I the right fit for this job? In which case, the person that brought us in, we're going to say, like, if you bring this person in, they're going to need support in this way. If you bring this person in, they're going to need support in this way.
So let's use an example. So someone does an assessment, and now we are 6 months out, maybe 12 months out. What has changed in that person from having done the assessment?
So it's getting them where they need to go quicker and smarter, right? So imagine if you were walking into a dark room and you're looking for, I don't know, the light switch, you're looking for something, and you don't have a flashlight, there's no other light. It's going to take you a while. Now imagine if I give you like a little flashlight with a little light, right? And that's going to take you a little bit less while. Imagine if I give you a big flashlight with a big light, or I just flip the switch, right? Oh, well, that's great, right? So now you're much more targeted in your behavior, right? And what you're doing, right? You're much more aware, right? And, when it comes to like personality and behavior assessments, like things that are about like just how we are, that's generally not going to change over time. So you can really use that in different environments. I'll just give you a silly example, right? So, we use a Hogan assessment a ton. I did it with my husband, and and so like, oh, okay, well, this makes sense. This is why I'm always talking about and thinking about money, because I'm really high in that score, right, of where I care about that, but I'm also probably good at
Sure.
that. And then
Yeah.
you are really care a lot about the aesthetics and how things look, right? I'm much more pragmatic and practical. I want the coffee table where I can just like easily put my stuff on it, but you want it where it's centered in the room. Well, because you're high in that, I'm just going to default to you. And if you say we need to make the pillows orange, I'm like, okay, fine, that's what we're going to do. But if I say
Yeah.
like we need to, I don't know, rein in spending, then you should listen to me.
Interesting. That's really interesting. What are some of the other things that the executives should know about doing the assessments? Okay.
If you're
Right.
an executive and you've been told as part of your, development program, you're being given these assessments. One, just answer it honestly. Two, don't get too hung up if it seems like you answered one way in one part of the assessment and you want to answer a different way on a different part of the assessment, even though the question seems to be pretty similar. Just go with your initial gut. Don't try to like make it correct, or try to, say what you think it wants to hear, right? Remember that the purpose is for you to have a better understanding of yourself, your natural style, your strengths, your potential, derailers, your motivators. And the more honest that is, again, without overthinking things, the better the person that's working with you is going to be able to create with you a tailored program that's going to help you be, even more effective in whatever you're trying to do. So that's the big thing. The other thing is just please take it like soon. Like a lot of times people have this worry or whatever, or they're just busy and so they don't take it. And so then we can't do our job, right? The final thing I'll say is, develop trust with like your executive coach or whoever it is that's supporting you through this process. You can ask on the front end, like, who's going to see this, right? Like, if it's a 360, is HR getting a copy? Is my manager getting a copy? If it's a personality assessment, the same thing. Get really clear, like, who's going to see this, and make sure you know on the front end, because you obviously don't want to fill something out based on what you want other people to think about you. You want to do it based on, how you really are.
I know that I've taken several of these types of assessments, or I should say, maybe not assessments from that perspective, but other like personality types of tests, and they, I think, are very useful in helping. They help me understand what my strengths were and why I tend to gravitate towards certain types of activities. And as a result, that would be a better fit for certain roles versus other roles. And so I definitely see what you're saying here in terms of you should do it. If you're an executive, you owe to yourself to do it and you owe to your team to do it, just because you can collectively improve everyone's performance just by knowing things that that are just much better articulated through these types of profiles. So
Yeah. And
very
if,
good.
if you've been, a leader for decades, you probably have done a bunch of these. What I would say is, um, just because you've done some in the past is not a reason to not do one currently. One, because there are different nuances to different assessments. Assessments themselves tend to get better over time. And finally, like there's nothing like a good jolt of, self-awareness to help you, at that next stage of your life and career.
Very good. Jeff, very enlightening. I would encourage everybody who is listening, if you're an executive, go ahead and get that assessment done. Dr. Jeff Kaplan can certainly help you get there. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, Jeff.
Thanks, Raj.